Hey there everyone, I'm Sean, and this is my first video in what will hopefully be a long-running series of books called The Scholar. For this review, I'll be taking a look at A Dance with Dragons, which came out a few months back in August. Book 5 of a planned 7, or possibly 8 now, in George R.R. Martin's series, A Song of Ice and Fire. This book was about 5 or 6 years in the making, very long period of time between this and the previous book, A Feast for Crows. For the uninitiated, A Song of Ice and Fire is a fantasy series featuring a lot of political posturing, blood feuds, people having sex, cold-blooded murder, civil war, people having sex, religious disagreements, people having sex, the return of magic to an otherwise mundane world, people having sex, and people having sex. Also enough political intrigue to drive a lesser man into madness. There's also an HBO series, which I have not yet seen. But according to people who have seen it, it's all those things, but with extra doses of people having sex injected into a story that was apparently sorely lacking in such things. The last book in the series was A Feast for Crows, which covers much of the same time period as Dance, just in a different location. As a result, Dance expands greatly on events that were discussed by other characters but never shown, such as Davis's trip to White Harbor and the movements of the Golden Company across the sea. Dance also continues the adventures of various fan favorites who haven't been seen since Book 3, including Jon, Dany, and Tyrion. Fair warning, from this point on I'm going to assume that you, the viewer, have at least some passing knowledge of the series, since if I explained everything about this series, we'd be here all day. For those of you hoping for a bit more closure on Feast's cast, don't worry. About 500 pages into this nearly 1,000-page novel, events begin to catch up with some of the plot lines from the previous book. About 700 pages in, the story is completely caught up with, and the rest of the book proceeds like previous entries in the series. Arya, Jaime, Cersei, Aisha, Victarion, and the Dornish court are all revisited. As for those of you expecting any closure on Dance's plot lines, you naive fools. Did you really think Martin would provide you with closure? Pretty much every plot thread ends with a cliffhanger, and I assume this is because Martin is a heartless bastard.
You bastards!
And I stand by that statement. Prepare to watch your favorite characters suffer horribly. Then again, if you made it this far into the story, you probably already knew to expect that. This is not a happy-go-lucky fantasy series. People say that the latter Harry Potter books are dark? You have no fracking idea what a dark fantasy is. Mechanically, Dance has no problems. I found no glaring spelling or grammar errors that pulled me out of the story, so the editors have clearly done their job properly. Props to them. Story-wise, Dance is plagued with many of the same problems that Feast had, although not as severe. There are times, particularly in Jon's and Dany's chapters, where it feels like Martin is just killing time until the next big event. Jon makes common cause with the wildlings, people grumble at him, Dany's role in Meereen is plagued by problems and she tries to solve them. This latter one involving Dany is particularly jarring since her story has a really good setup. Not only is she trying to learn how to be a good queen, but the first of her chapters introduces the added complications of her dragons becoming more and more difficult to control. I mean, this could have made an amazingly awesome story. But unfortunately, Dany learns little about leadership throughout the course of the novel, and, if anything, somehow manages to grow even more naive, extending her trust to people who, in previous books, she would have kept at arm's length. You'd think she would have learned her lesson after the Mirri Maz Duur incident. As for the dragon subplot, it's mostly swept under the rug, as Dany's solution is to stick her dragons in a dungeon. This is a huge disappointment, since the book could have told a great story about her learning to tame and control her beasts. And while the plot direction Martin chose does lead to a pretty cool scene near the ending, not to spoil anything or give it away, it could have been so much more. As for the supporting cast, Stannis is still a dick. The Freys are assholes, Ramsay Bolton is a psychopath, and Wyman Manderly completely steals the show. Good old Lord Lard manages to come across as a talented chess master, all while purposely cultivating an image as a fat moron so people take him as less of a threat. There's even a subtle blink and you'll miss it scene where he takes revenge on some Freys for certain events in A Storm of Swords. Not to give anything away, but you may want to brush up on your Westerosi ghost stories. Overall, Dance with Dragons continues the series' proud tradition of reducing readers to bitter tears and angry cursing. For a book that took so long to be written, it's adequate. The lack of any real resolutions makes the long wait seem kind of pointless, but I suppose with 2 or possibly 3 more novels on the way, it was just inevitable. I, for one, look forward to reading The Winds of Winter in 2021. Sean out.
I'm too late and it's more than a game. The river reveals now I'm in between these lines. I cannot escape, it seems. Sail on, my friend.